Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, November 16th, 2023, and this is the meeting of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority for the City of Edina, meeting in City Council chambers. It is 7:34 a.m. in the morning, and I think our Communications Director, Jennifer Bennerat, told folks in the audience that there's one opportunity to communicate with the HRA this morning, and that's in the public comment portion of the agenda, and that's coming up fairly soon. Here's the number if you're tuning in on a remote basis, which is possible, watching us through an electronic medium. You can certainly call in, and there is the phone number and the conference PIN number. Press star 1 to speak to an operator. The operator will bring you to Director Bennerat, and Director Bennerat will bring you into the HRA. So no public hearings today, so that one opportunity to talk about things that are of a concern to you that are not on the agenda today or scheduled for a future public hearing are topics that you can cover and concerns of residents. So let's now call the meeting to order, and I'll ask Liz Olson, our Planning Administrative Support Specialist, to call the roll. Liz Olson?
Commissioner Risser. Here. Commissioner Jackson. Here. Commissioner Agnew.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We've got a meeting agenda that's been published in advance of the meeting. Is there anyone that wishes to modify the agenda in any form or fashion on the HRA or staff? Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as published?
So moved. Second.
Commissioner Jackson moves. Commissioner Agnew seconds the adoption of the meeting agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the meeting agenda as published, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Now we are back at community comment. We've got a few of our residents here this morning, a couple of our fellow residents that may wish to speak to us or just observe the meeting, or both. And I welcome them up, and then we'll go to the virtual world and see if we've got anybody that's tuning in that wishes to speak to us as well. Welcome.
David Frankel, 4510 Lakeview Drive, Edina. As you're well aware, the City of Edina belongs to the National League of Cities, and we spend a lot of time and money sending elected officials and staff to national meetings every year. My concern is we don't listen to them. The National League of Cities 5 years ago put out a press release, and they have a website concerning using data and evidence in decision making. It's not rocket science. It's, at this time and point, it's a mature technology. The League of Cities has seminars and web-based classes accessing how to use data and evidence in decision making. Don't see a lot of city documents and discussions that use data in decision making. It's not just, data shouldn't just be used for decision making, but should also be to track projects and to track the aftermath of projects. For example, the city of Minneapolis has a website called Open Data, where you can go and see various departments, how they use data in their decision making, and where data comes from. It's important. They often refer to data as the new oil. It's valuable. A lot of times I have to, other residents have to do data requests to get this data. The data oftentimes should be on the city website and accessible. There should be no data that's hidden from residents except for personnel reviews. And I would hope the city at some point would take the National League of Cities directive more seriously and not only collecting but posting more data and evidence when they make decisions, and when those decisions are published that shows data. One huge example is the aging of Minnesota, which includes Edina, obviously. State demographer recently came out and said between 1990 and 2030, the number of citizens in Minnesota is going to double, those over 65, from 500,000 to 1 million. Are we making decisions based on a population that's getting older, or are we making decisions based on a snapshot of today's data? The other thing I'd like to mention, the Pew survey estimates about 10% of people in Edina have disabilities, physical disabilities. Do you take that in consideration when you make ADA decisions? We have an aging population that also has disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frankel. Anyone else in the audience wish to address the council on a matter of concern to them? All right. Anybody tuning in that wishes to speak to the HRA?
Yes, operator, will you please unmute the line of our first caller? And caller, please begin by stating your full name and address for the record.
Good morning. This is Susan Lee at 6708 Point Drive. The HRA may feel that it is the city administration's purview to determine infrastructure and construction priorities. However, when the city falls short on self-limits, then it's up to you to recognize this and correctly set the expectations. The Grandview pedestrian bridge highlights the problems that can happen when there is no standard procedure for evaluating and prioritizing infrastructure and new development projects. Using unspent TIF monies to prioritize the construction of a secondary pedestrian access route to connect the Jerry's Food Market based on expected development of the former public works site has served no one well, especially when it dead ends inside of a dated, non-ADA compliant parking ramp. It is now referred to as the bridge to nowhere. No thought was given by the engineering department as to how to connect the bridge to the existing pedestrian network. Will the HRA continue to repeat this waste? Rather than following developer-driven timetables, establish guidelines now by proactively publishing the HRA work plan and list of priorities for the city of Edina. Pause now to thoughtfully number the goals and policies already suggested in our comprehensive plan, assigning an order in which they will be addressed. Be clear with residents, city staff, and the greater development community that this list will be adhered to, and all projects must first show where they fall in priority. Please do not place your residents in a position of being held hostage by a developer's timetable or their ability to secure funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee.
I have no other callers at this time.
All right. Our practice is that following public comment, we have our city manager, in this case, sitting as our executive director, respond to community comments that were made at the prior meeting. And I'll turn now to Executive Director Neal. Do we have any comments that you wish to make?
We don't have any from the previous meeting, but we will, of course, have some at our next meeting.
All right. Very good. And for the comments that were made today, either in person or online, as you mentioned, we'll address those at our meeting 2 weeks from today.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you. Now we turn to the consent agenda. We have just a couple of items on there. Is there anyone that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Is there a motion to adopt the items on the consent agenda in a single motion?
So moved. Second.
Commissioner Jackson moves. Commissioner Agnew seconds the adoption of the items on the consent agenda. Anything further from a discussion standpoint? All those in favor of adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And now we move on to the kind of the heart of the meeting, our report and recommendations portion of the meeting. And Stephanie Hawkinson is going to give us an update on her annual compliance report on affordable housing. It's a 2022 affordable housing compliance report. And it is informational only. No action will be required.
Yes, good morning. And the year on this is correct. We are reporting on how well the inclusionary housing developments did with regards to compliance in 2022. I'd like to say, I realize it's November. The compliance review started in early spring, but we did find this year a lot of issues. And it has taken up until now to get all those issues resolved to the point where we wanted to report. I didn't want to report last spring and say everyone's out of compliance when they are working very hard to get into compliance. So the reason one of the main purposes of the affordable housing policy is to provide housing in Edina that is affordable to low and moderate income households. So one way we confirm and verify that those households are being served is to look at the tenant files of the affordable units to make sure that they are income qualified. And we also want to make sure that the rents, are affordable at the level stated. So we hired in 2019 Affordable Housing Connections to work with the property managers and owners on reviewing the files. And a lot of times it is also to just teach and consult. With market rate projects, it's very different. They don't need to look at income caps. They want to make sure that income is 3 times the rent generally. But with affordable, you have to look at assets as well as basic income to make sure that the affordable units aren't being rented to people that could afford a lot more, that they're being reserved for the folks that need them. So they meet with the property managers, and there's been a lot of turnover in this industry. So they will spend a fair amount of time training leasing agents and managers, and then they leave and they have to retrain, and so they've been spending a lot of time doing training. They meet them throughout the year to make sure that files are set up properly for new tenants, and then to make sure that the annual reviews are done appropriately. They're always available to answer questions either by me or by the property managers. And they talk with us because we've evolved with this policy and we've evolved with the program. In the early days, we would say in the resolution, you will have 10% of your units affordable at 60% area median income, without really defining what all that meant and what all the parameters around that. Now we have sections in our redevelopment agreements. This is, in a way, how government evolves when we talk about paperwork, but it also, as we've learned over time, that there's been misunderstanding, misinterpretation, so we're trying to become very clear. So again, we are looking at 2 areas. 1, that the tenants are income eligible, and 2, that the rents are what are deemed affordable based on charts that are published by the federal government for this area. We have 6 projects that are open that are have this inclusionary housing. Aria, Aurora, Avidor, Millennium, Nolan Mains, and Lorient. The first 4 were done and negotiated prior to having a formal policy in place. We believe, although not, you'll see from the previous table, all are in compliance to the agreements that were put in place at the time that they were approved. Annually, I report that ARIA is not in compliance with rules as they evolved. Even though Aurora, Avidor, and Millennium have agreed to the new rules that rent includes all the costs required to be sheltered in that place. So rent plus utilities, and if parking is a requirement, the cost of parking all needs to fall underneath the rent limit. So the ones that were approved before we were really able to define this, 3 of them agreed to that standard. ARIA has not agreed to that standard, so their rent is the maximum rent, and they have fees on top of that. So the overall cost to live in ARIA is a lot higher than it is in the other ones. We believe, though, that all managers, they are doing income verification, even at ARIA. And we believe that they all have intention, even though there's a lot of issues this year with noncompliance. There's a lot of refunds made to tenants for overpayment. But we believe that their intentions are good. It was misunderstanding, just training new people. Early agreements were not prescriptive. In the case of Millennium, they sold the property, and with the new owners, we were able to record a declaration against the property. They agreed to it. So we were able to, even though they had no money, we had no money in the deal, they agreed to having us place a declaration on it to preserve the affordability. And we are now doing that with all projects that do not have city financing. that have affordable units. And we, part of our redevelopment agreement is including the policy guide that explains how to do all this. So that's my annual report.
Thank you. Manager Hawkinson. Questions for Manager Hawkinson? Member Risser?
Is there a way to kind of ensure that people do not fall out of compliance? I mean, would there be some way to message directly with tenants who qualify for the affordable units so that they were aware that they were not supposed to be charged for other things? Because I can imagine this situation, again, with staff turnover, that's not changing. What can we do to kind of stop this from happening?
The way we find out that it is happening, other than through these reports, is tenants call me.
They do.
No, they call me a lot. They call me asking what is the allowable rent increases. They call me to say what else is included in rent. They call me asking if it's okay to charge for parking on top of rent when it's optional. I field calls all the time, and that's sometimes how we find out prior to the compliance review that something may be amiss, and we dig into it.
It's good people are calling and complaining. My concern is that not everybody is that squeaky wheel. And so just, really anything we can do to make sure that this type of thing doesn't happen again. Because getting a refund is one thing, but it can be super, super burdensome. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in your report, you talk about that we're not going to publicize it. The ARIA has affordable units at this time, correct? And I guess my question is are there unintended consequences to that? I know that they're working to get in compliance and that they're out of compliance, and therefore we need to limit how we advertise that. But I just want to make sure that we do so in a way to encourage them to come into compliance and not have some unintended consequences.
Chair, Commissioners, we've been told by them point blank that they're not going to.
Okay.
They adhere to our initial agreement, and that's the way it is. And they had an attorney send us a memo saying that that's the way it is, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Okay, so they're going. I think that the silver lining to that is that they're going to adhere to the original agreement.
They're adhering to the original agreement,
and that's my concern is that they set it. They don't do any sort of set aside, and I think that given the parameters of where they are, they're going to stay where they are and not change for the worse.
Chair, Commissioners, that is a decision that I will leave to you. Previous commissioners felt that since the rents were not affordable when you add utilities, that it was false advertising to include it, and so I was directed to not include it. If the feelings have changed, then I'm willing to re-add them, but I was directed before to not add them.
I don't want to be misleading. I agree with your decision.
Oh, okay.
I 100% agree with your decision. My concern is that I think you've answered my question, that they are not going to go back on their original agreement as
Correct.
well. That's my concern.
Yep.
Okay, so yes, I agree with the direction taken, but I just don't want to have any further deterioration of affordability.
Right, I understand. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Let me turn to Commissioner Agnew now.
Thank you. I want to build on this a little more. So I do understand that ARIA is in compliance with how they understood the agreement to be when it was made. If they weren't, what are the levers that we have as a city?
Chair, Commissioners, that is a challenging question, quite honestly, because a lot of the requirements for these inclusionary, if they have financing, and a lot of times if it's TIF, we can stop TIF payments. And that is one lever we have used, where we delayed a TIF payment until they became in compliance. If they do not have any financing, there's nothing really we can do. We resort to, excuse the crass notion, but public shaming at this annual review. But if we have no money in the deal, that it's brought in on a regular basis, our hands are pretty tied.
Thank you, and I'm sure that that would influence kind of future arrangements with that same developer as well. Okay, so when we look at the graph then, this is pivoting on my question, we see the 6 properties, 6 different developments. Is that the entirety of the developments, those 6 within Edina that are under this policy today?
Chair Commissioners, there's 2 under construction that have that are starting to lease up but have not had compliance. They've had, to Commissioner Risser's point, they've had initial meetings with, somewhat to your point, initial meetings with property management as they're leasing up to make sure they start out on the right foot. But they haven't opened yet, and that would be the Eddy and Maison Green. So there will be 8 when those are open. There will be 9, the Finch. That's not on this list yet because it's not really under construction much right now.
Do we do any of this review for properties that are intended to be 100% affordable?
Chair Commissioners, those are heavily scrutinized by the state, by tax credit investors, primarily. So it would be very redundant to have our own compliance officer go in there on the heels of 2 other compliance folks.
Understood. Thank you so much.
Back to Member Risser. This conversation prompted another thought for her.
Right. I'm just, I'm thinking you walk into buildings and you see certificates for various things, right? For compliance. And what if, on the community bulletin board or someplace, we could have, some kind of certificate that indicates this building has affordable units. It is a policy of Edina that all affordable units, and just outline what we've been talking about. And, just so that it's very clear and it's something that wouldn't be obtrusive, but it would be there and present for people to see. And it would also be there for staff to see, just to have that.
I think that is definitely an idea worth considering. I will work with our graphic designer to see if we can create something.
Thank you.
So I'm assuming that with the ones under construction, the Eddy and Maison Green, that the agreements that we will have with them won't have the same sort of imperfections, if you will, that we had with ARIA. Because I think ARIA always thought the language was very clear, that they were going to be compliant on rent, but the agreement did not address utilities or underground parking. So they've been steadfast in the notion that they're in compliance with the agreement as crafted.
Correct.
And it's the plain language of the agreement. There's no ambiguity in it. And I think when we look at it, as I recall, we've thought the same thing. I mean, if they want to stand behind that, and that's what they've continued to do, we're in a position where we have to live with that. But we learned from that. And so I'm just wanting to make sure that as we go forward, we make it clear that it's an all-in sort of cost or all-in sort of pricing situation with respect to people that are coming in under the affordable units.
Chair, Commissioners, yes, indeed, we are very clear. With Maison Green, they do have some public financing involved, so we have an extra carrot for ongoing compliance, that if they fall out of compliance. With the Eddy, there is no public financing involved, so we've been clear. We have included our program guide in with but it was a SIPA. So once the project is built, that agreement pretty much concludes. And it was during the construction and approval of that one that I worked with the city attorney, Dave Kendall, and we have subsequently created a declaration that gets recorded on properties that do not have city financing.
Have you got your contracts in place yet with the Eddy and the Maison Green?
The contracts are established when we close on the property after they get site plan approval and financing approval. So those agreements are already in place and executed. And they both state in there the parameters of what affordable means and how many units need to remain affordable and for the term that they're affordable. But again, we have a strong carrot and stick with Maison Green, and it's a little fuzzier with Eddy.
Sure, yeah. I just think, I remember Risser had an interesting idea, because you always wonder, well, how do people find out what's an affordable unit or affordable building? You know, what buildings that are a blend of affordable and market could I potentially be in if I were in an affordable housing category? So having something posted up, or someone goes to look at an apartment building, seems like an interesting idea to me. So I would encourage you that with the Eddy and Maison Green, maybe we have more leverage with Maison Green than the Eddy because of the TIF financing, to include a provision in the contract that requires them to post up the notice on their main notification board at the entrance of the building that this is an affordable housing building. So, you know, and craft something that will catch people's attention. I think it's a good idea. Yes.
Thank you. I'm just trying to think through the implications, and we think about equity. It would very much depend on what that imagery looks like, but I wouldn't want to kind of pinpoint of like allow people to know like these are the affordable units and cast any type of shadow on that. And so I would just want to be conscious of how all of that plays together.
Chair Commissioner, clearly. And I have worked with one owner, because on their website, when you went through the floor plans of the different units, they would designate this as affordable unit, and I told them to take that down. So there is no red A on the doors of the affordable units. There was a situation in one of the buildings where one of the tenants called me because she was at the mailbox, and the woman next to her was complaining, said, I did not know there were affordable units in this building. I would never have rented here had I known that. And she was in one of those, the woman she was talking to was in one of those affordable units. And so I wanted to be very clear that there was no designation anywhere on the website, on their website, on our website, anywhere on which units were indeed affordable.
Any follow-on? No, I think that's a good thought too, to make sure we don't call it out to, you know, so that it puts some kind of stigma on the folks that are in an affordable category renting in a building. So
Exactly.
The very purpose of that is to just blend everybody together, and it's a good notion. Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else for Manager Hawkinson? All right. Thanks for that update. Appreciate it. And now we're going to talk about something that we talked about a few weeks ago. A little bit of potential activity down at 50th and France in the live entertainment arena that Manager Neuendorf thinks we should consider a forgivable loan with Buell 3906 to help with some improvements down there that would be appropriate under the particular type of loan that we would provide. Welcome, Mr. Neuendorf.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. As you mentioned, the proposal this morning is to consider a loan agreement with a private entity that owns property at 50th and France that has been working hard to lease a vacant space there. There was, due to a schedule conflict, the developer is not able to be with us this morning. He was at the previous meeting and answered your questions then. But just so you know, he's not able to be with us this morning, unfortunately. But we've been working with this developer on this. I've been chatting with this developer for a couple years on this project. It's a vacant space that's at 50th and France, one of the prime locations in our community. One of the reasons that it's vacant is that it's a lower level space that's inaccessible. There's no elevator, there's no lift. And that's that's really constrained how that space could be used over the decades. In past decades, it was used as an office, it was used as a storage room, it was used as for a short time as a retail space, which didn't really work very well, but it's always been underutilized in such a prime location. So the developer is ready to execute a lease with an operator to put a new restaurant with full food and beverage service and live music there. One of the constraints is funding, is getting the thing funded and built. So this is a great opportunity to use the Spark program that we established to help create jobs in Edina and bring this space into a usable condition. I'll walk through a brief presentation here and then happy to answer any questions, of course. But the site is just across the street from the Edina Theater. It's the lower level space next to Pajarito and next to the new Lululemon. From the front on 50th Street, it only has a very small entrance. It's actually a rear exit for the space. And the main entrance is actually on the back, facing the inner courtyard and that Nolan Mains Plaza. So that's another thing that constrains it, but it's also part of the charm of that particular space. This image shows it in its current condition. It can only get better than this. These are renderings of what the operator has in mind to subdivide it into basically 3 key components: a kitchen food prep area, a bar seating area, and then a table seating area with a live music stage. It's a small, intimate space, so it's not like a big dance hall, nightclub type of thing, but the focus will be on good food, beverages, and live music. This is a draft of the architectural layout for the site. 50th Street is on the right of the image. The table service music area is next, and then the bar seating area is in the middle, and the food prep area is on the left side of your screen. In the lower left-hand corner is an X, and that's the lift. So that's the big expensive item that without it, the space cannot be utilized. It's a couple $100,000 just to get that installed. And that's what my recommendation is, that we fund to make this space usable. So we've talked about the problem at the last meeting in October. Great space, good location, but no ADA access. And the cost of fixing that would raise the rent to the point to where the tenant would not be able to operate. So the agreement that's in front of you and attached this morning follows the term sheet that was presented to you in October. The project cost is just over $1 million. That's an estimate. They don't have firm numbers yet. The loan amount is up to $225,000. Might be a little bit less, but I think that'll probably be the loan amount. When everything comes in place, they'd be looking to open next spring or summer. And then I put the timing of the project through 2025 because that's the period that would matter to the HRA. If we do provide the funding, we want to make sure that they renovate the space, start the business, and then keep the business operational. If they're successfully able to keep the business running till the end of 2025, then we would forgive the loan. The loan agreement identifies what types of expenses are eligible, and we're really focusing on those ADA type improvements, those accessible improvements, but also any, once you start doing ADA, sometimes that means you've got to do new doors, and then when you do new doors, you've got to do new windows. So it kind of, it can steamroll. So anything that would be related to that would be eligible. But only those construction costs, not design costs, not permit fees, just the cost of actually getting this space accessible. We've worked with our attorney to also look at the Minnesota Business Subsidy Act. There is a law when cities or HRA provides funding to private businesses, there's a business subsidy law that has a handful of different exceptions. and this project fits underneath those exceptions. There's an exception for funding that would support the reoccupation of a old or decaying building stock, which this would be considered. It was built in the 40s. The last item to bring up that's in the contract is a provision for miscellaneous expenses. We're recommending that up to $150,000 also be made available to the HRA, not to the developer, to the HRA, to make sidewalk improvements and public improvements in the front and the rear of the building. That is something that's also allowable under the Spark law and also the business subsidy law. Initially, I had $50,000 as a cap, but once we started looking into some of the infrastructure there, the sidewalk is in decent shape on the front, but on the back it's not. And once we started looking into it, there's directory signage, there's utilities. I don't know what we're going to get into, so I thought it'd be better to raise the cap. Again, that would be money that would be made available strictly to the HRA to use as we deem appropriate to make those public spaces in better condition. So how would we administrate this? Because we don't do this very often, right? This is only the third time we've done something like this. So the owner has a certain set of responsibilities, execute the lease to satisfy the terms of this loan agreement, secure private funding. Private funders are the majority of this project, and then build it and get the project built. The second step falls on the city, and that is certifying the completion of the project, making sure that the developer has done what he's promised to do. We'd review those eligible costs, make sure that there's lien waivers and that everyone got paid, including the trickle down to make sure that the workers got paid, not just the contractor. The third step would be to issue the loan, and then the fourth step from our perspective would be to verify at the end of 2025 whether or not we forgive part of the loan, all of the loan, or none of the loan. So in 2026, the HRA would be out of the deal, and hopefully we'd have a successful business running there for many years. So the agreement in front of you, as I mentioned, follows to the letter the term sheet that was considered in October. Mr. Dinovic just was able to join us, so if you have any questions for myself or for Mr. Dinovic, we're happy to answer any questions.
Questions, Commissioner Risser.
Thank you. I was not here for that meeting, but I did watch it. One question I have is, will stores in Edina and in the 50th and France area have different policies in terms of, or different protocol for bathrooms? Like some places, if you need to use a bathroom, you got to go get a code or a key. And I'm thinking, if we are going to be paying for that ADA elevator and the stairs and everything, and it comes down right by the bathrooms, could we get a commitment that they're not going to be opposed to, someone coming in and using them and maybe not staying to listen for music or something like that?
That's a question that Mr. Dinovic could answer better than myself.
Could you hear the question, Mr. Dinovic?
Yes.
Yeah, let us know who you are, too, for the record, please.
Pete Dinovic, Buell Investors, 5100 Eden Avenue, Suite 317, Edina, and then also Morningside neighborhood. I think that ultimately will come down to the operator and the insurance that they have and their hours of operation. So as we've built out spaces, we do have restrooms in each of the Nolan Mains projects. By code, has to have access to restrooms. So if you go into Suite Science, for instance, there is a restroom that's not key card accessed, that's freely available to the public. Similarly, in the Carillon building, as we reposition that with Faraday and Brilliant Earth and Faribault Windmills, those restrooms are also available to the public if someone needed to use those, and those are not within the stores. So I think there's a framework where we can probably utilize better signage to make sure that folks know that that's a way to access restrooms that are not part of the store. And I think that's a great suggestion, because ultimately we want people who are down there to be patroning these businesses for longer periods of time.
So there's no way to write that into the agreement so that we could have assurance it's dependent on who leases it? I would think we could take some preemptive measure to guarantee that, if someone is there, sometimes you got to use the bathroom and you're not intending to go into the business. And so I would like more assurance than it would be dependent on who the leaser is.
Something we could look into. I don't know the legalities of it, and we don't have counsel with us this morning. But Mr. Edina pointed out one of the key things. I mean, this is a private business, and they will be pursuing a liquor license. So does that mean that someone under 21 can enter the bar because they want to use the bathroom, or do they have to be with a parent or an adult? The hours of operations are going to be totally up to the operator, not up to the city. So it's something we could pursue and look into, but I don't know if it would deliver what you're looking for.
Any follow-on, member, Commissioner?
So this is a facility for people 21 and over?
Well,
That's dependent on the leaser?
They will be pursuing a liquor license.
Okay.
I think my commitment would be to make sure that the Carillon building has that better public access. I mean, I think that ultimately is not within a store. We own that. We know the hours. And I think we can manage that fairly easily. We have not allowed kind of broad public access, partly because in our Pinehurst building, we've had folks that have gone in and wanted to kind of stay the night. And that's been something just from a consumer experience we've been trying to manage fairly closely. But I think if that's something that you find to be a need in the district, I mean, I think we can try and work through the dynamic in the Carillon building quite easily.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So you answered a bunch of my questions, that this space has been underutilized on a perennial basis, and this will help us get it more to the market, marketability. A couple of questions. I'm not entirely sure how these funds for the sidewalk improvements and the HRA improvements interact with this agreement that we're doing today. So it would be Spark funds up to $150,000 to do outdoor improvements, essentially.
Correct.
And that funding we're not approving today, or are we? And how does this loan agreement affect our HRA spending of that $150,000?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, that is not clear. My apologies. So we would do it the same way we did when we approved work at the Edina Theater building. So the contract today is strictly between the HRA and the private party for the elevators and things. By signifying your agreement to spend up to $150 for the HRA to do that, we still have to go and get a contractor and get bids and define the scope of the work. So that would be coming back to you at a later date, most likely in the spring, where we would have a more precise amount and a more precise scope of work, and we would be seeking your consent to enter into that contract. So what I'm seeking for at this time is just your general consent that you're okay with that. It's also something that's important to the developer and the operator. Just like with the movie theater, those pavers on that site were in horrible condition. They didn't want patrons coming in, exiting the building, and tripping on the sidewalk when they left. So we want to make sure that we're all good neighbors. Yeah, but we'll be back to you with a different contract.
So this agreement is to memorialize between us and the developer that work will be done in conjunction with the work that they're doing.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. speaking of data, how did we determine November 2025 as the sort of viability time period for this emerging business?
Yeah, the state law that governs Spark has December 2025 as a critical milestone. So we established November because we want to get it closed out by the end of 2025. And in case there's any wrinkles or any hiccups, I want to give us at least a sliver of breathing room. So we wrote in the end of November rather than the end of December. But that date comes from the state law that governs these monies.
Okay, terrific, thank you. And then the final thing is actually just a small change, and that's on page 10 of the agreement. It says the borrower shall cooperate with the city, school district, and Twin City-based nonprofits to allow use of the space. The school district is written in there as if it is a defined term, and it's not in the definitions. If it's possible to make a change and call it just public school districts, because private school districts would fall under the nonprofits designation and not make that look like a defined term. I think that's the same intent, but I just want to make sure that we don't have a school district in mind and then which school district is that, so a little ambiguity.
What we had in mind was Edina-based school districts as opposed to every school district that exists in the Twin Cities.
Yeah. So maybe Edina located public school district, or Edina associate or something like that.
We're happy to make that edit.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you. And I think just to add on that last point related to the school districts, the point would be not to just state Edina School District, but encapsulate all of them that touch into Edina. I think it would be important. The question that I had was really around the loan amount and how it's written into the agreement. So in the agreement it says $225,000. In our summary, that's what the amount is for the approximate. But then there's also some ambiguity, and you were even saying this too, right? Like once you get in, you start doing ADA compliance, you might find out that you need to update other things. And so how is that a hard cap, or what happens in the event that more costs related to ADA compliance are uncovered during the project?
Yeah, good question. So it's intended as a hard cap. So we're seeking up to $225,000 for that type of work. If that part of the work goes over budget, that falls on the developer side of the equation. If it comes in under budget, then our loan amount would be a little bit less. But in projects like this, in older buildings like this, I honestly don't expect it to be much less. But I would look at it as a hard cap, $225,000.
Okay. So wanting to dig into that, if we think it'll be right around there, but we also want to give some of that flexibility for the additional costs that might be uncovered, should it be more? Or are you confident that in other retrofits that you've seen that they can do the totality of the upgrades needed within this 225?
So from when I negotiate these, when I work with developers, I don't offer them any more than what they ask for. And so maybe it's more. They'd probably like some additional support if necessary. Maybe they come back with an amendment. But at this point, they think they can get it done for the dollar amounts in there. And with the dollars available to the HRA, it is a limited pool. So I would not offer them any more than they ask for.
That makes sense. Thank you so much.
I was concerned too about what Commissioner Jackson raised, was the timing of the forgiveness of the loan. It struck me that, this is going to be something that gets constructed during 2024. And so this would be a very young business. And we're saying that if you're still in business on November 30, 2025, which is probably a year and a half at the most, year and a quarter, we're going to forgive this loan. And I was trying to think back to what we did with the theater. I thought the theater was a 10-year period of time for forgiveness. So I'm wondering why we have to think about that 11/30/25 date as a forgiveness date.
Sure. So you're correct. Your recollection is correct on the Edina Theater. That forgiveness comes after year 6. So the theater had a 5-year lease term with 2 5-year options, and that loan agreement said, when you execute that first option, you're in for 10 years, and we're happy with that. We'll see how that goes, but as we've understood more about this law, the state law that governs these dollars, there's a lot of ambiguity in the law, and so we're hearing different things from the auditor's office, from the accountants, and from the attorneys, and most of those comments are really looking at that 2025 date as a critical date for these monies. So at this point, they haven't said that existing agreement is a problem, but they might. So as we enter into new agreements, I'm trying to keep them clean so that we don't have to come back and revise things and work with the state auditor's office and work with attorneys more. And so it is a relatively short term. How I feel comfortable with that is even if that tenant leaves, which would be a big waste of a lot of people's money at that point, the building has a permanent elevator that they can lease to another tenant, and that to me is the critical piece in this whole project, is to solve the problem of how we can make that space usable and leasable. So I hope the user is in there for 10 years or 20 years or more, but worst case scenario, if they're not, the community still has a space that's leasable, and I think that's the priority that I'm trying to address.
Okay. Yeah, it strikes me that you still got, by December 31st of 2025, we've still got $4 or $5 million in that spark fund that we could potentially use. It seems as you go along that if you're going to get to the point where on that continuum, you're going to move from forgivable loans to grants, because you don't really have any kind of period of time in which you can evaluate whether business is going to stay viable or not. So this is just a really short window.
It is.
Unfortunately, apparently imposed on us by the law. So remind me again how we created this fund with the idea of it being somewhat renewable, or is that, that we could make these loans and
right.
Some of them would be repaid, and then we'd have something beyond December 31, 2025 that we could use as a source of funds for grants or other types of loans.
Right. Yeah, that's a big picture goal. So when we talked about the use of these funds last year, we looked at 3 different types of projects we could fund. Some would be small grants just to help small businesses get started. The next step up, kind of medium-sized projects, would be grants or loans, forgivable loans, to address distinct problems like this one. The third category would be larger loans. That would be traditional loans. We loan you $4 million, you pay us back $4 million with interest. You might recall I proposed something like that for a hotel a few months ago. Mm-hmm. That ultimately did not move forward. So for those larger loans, those are the type where, as we've looked at the nuances of the state legislation, when they repay those loans in the future, those loans could be retained by the HRA, kept in a revolving loan fund, and used again. My recommendation is to do that, is to seek that type of renewal for larger size projects, $500,000 or higher. For relatively small projects, and $225,000 is still a lot of money, but in the big scheme of commercial development, it's a relatively small project. That's the type where all the effort to try to recapture it, I don't know if it's worth the dollar amount that we'd actually get back. So that's why we've structured this as a forgivable loan.
Okay, good reminder there. Thank you. In terms of the spark fund usage here on the forgivable loan, I like the idea of it. I like the idea of creating an ADA accessible elevator or ADA accessible bathroom within this space. the notion of being able to promote the economic viability of the entire district. I think this is another element of that that's really helpful. That I'm okay with. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about was the criteria for partial forgiveness or complete forgiveness or no forgiveness. I mean, you kind of alluded to that generally, and I'm assuming there's some more specific language around that in the contract. There's a default language I noticed in there, but could you provide a little bit more detail around the criteria for no forgiveness, partial forgiveness, or complete forgiveness?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, that's articulated in more detail on page 6 of the contract.
Okay.
And it's all based on that November 2025 date. If they pass that date and the business is still operational and they've satisfied all the other terms, we would forgive the full amount. If we get to November 30th and the operator has started, but things fell apart and they closed and it's not operational on November 30th, we would forgive only half of the dollar amount. And the other half would be due back to us at interest. And then the other absolute worst case scenario is the developer does the work. For some reason, we provide the funding, but then the operator never even gets started. I mean, that's not the deal. In that case, it would be fully returnable to us at an interest rate.
Okay, good.
So
I see that higher level of detail on 3.03, so that's good. All right. When you mentioned the public improvements that could be made down there, $150,000 on those passageway or sidewalk improvements, and I don't know if we're trending towards stamped concrete now or we're still doing pavers. But it also caused me to think about wayfinding down there, and Mr. Dinovic and I have had a conversation about that, and I know you visited with him about that as well. That seems to me to be another important piece of a conversation about the economic vitality of 50th and France, and that is really good wayfinding equipment as people are down there walking around. So in particular, to get them directed over to Market Street, which is, you know, there's some really good businesses over there that I think need better wayfinding. So what's the status of the conversations around us spending some money, some public money or some spark money around wayfinding?
Well, it's a great lead-in. So I'm putting the pieces together. So separately, we applied for a grant from Hennepin County to help with the wayfinding program there. We'll find out if we secure that grant in December of this year. There's also some other monies actually in a parking fund that we think we can use to match the Hennepin County grant. And then the way that I've structured the wording in this agreement is with $150,000 for the HRA, we've written that to include sidewalks, lighting, and wayfinding. Because right in front of this business is one of those old wayfinding signs. And again, one of the nuances of the law that governs these monies, I can touch things that are right on the property or right next to the property. But I can't fix things that are 3 blocks down the road.
Okay.
So our hope is that we, at a minimum, we get at least that one directory sign updated or upgraded, or we still have to figure out exactly what that is. But as we've been looking at different vendors and different systems, as you start getting with more modern approaches, you've got technology needs, now you need to run fiber. It gets very expensive very quickly. And that's why I recommended that we increase the amount to $150,000. So as we put a pool of funds together for this wayfinding, the pieces will start adding up to something, and I think that's the time to implement. Just to do one like a one-off project, I don't think gets us very far. But if we can get 3 or 4 smaller parcels or projects together, that I think is helpful to the consumer. So this is another piece in that puzzle.
All right. Did this dialogue with Manager Neuendorf cause anybody else to have any additional questions? You're requesting that we pass a motion to approve the forgivable loan agreement, which you've got attached to your presentation. It's styled the loan agreement between the Edina Housing Redevelopment Authority and Buell 3906 LLC for the 3916 West 50th Street Commercial Renovation Reoccupancy Project. You'd like to see a motion to approve that forgivable loan agreement with 3906 Buell LLC and the HRA. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
All right. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved. A second.
Commissioner Jackson moves. Commissioner Agnew seconds. The adoption of the motion is stated. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion stated say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Here we go. Another new advancement at 50th and France. And everything going well at Nolan Mains?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good to hear. All right, now we've got one other project we've been talking about, is how to get people safely across France Avenue. Thanks, Mr. Dienerich. And we're going to touch on that, and then just a reminder that we have a little bit of work to do as City Council this morning, and that is to do the post-election work that we usually have to do. So, all right, let's talk about the France Avenue pedestrian crossing project update. Get that.
And in the interest of time, I'm going to run through this really quickly. So the France Avenue pedestrian crossing, I'm not going to read what's on the screen. But we've been studying this concept for a few months, as you know. The idea came because there's two properties right across the street from each other that will most likely be rebuilt in the next few years. Both developers have asked for tax increment financing due to the cost to comply with the Southdale design guidelines, putting in roads, plazas, those types of things. So what we're trying to do here is get ahead of the curve, knowing that eventually the redevelopment of both of these sites is a better thing for the community. We try to flush out what type of public way would be most interesting to the community. So over the months, we've met with the property owners, we've met with their designers. We hired our own consultant to look at it from our perspective, talk to the neighbors, and then more recently, we reached out on the Better Together Edina website to get additional ideas. We put together a document called a scrapbook of ideas, because literally that's where we are. There's a lot of good ideas. We really need to focus on what could actually work here. So over the months, we've identified skinny little tunnels. We've identified broad underpasses, bridges, simple bridges, complicated bridges, concourses, sunken plazas. We've looked at other cities where they actually leave the sidewalk alone and completely redo the street. So we've tried to be broad in how we've started this conversation. And then we'll get focused in just a minute. When we reached out on Better Together, not scientific data, let me say that. We had about 500 people view the page. We had about 100 people actually spend a lot of time on the page and look at the various information that was out there. And we had several dozen actually submit ideas, comments, things we like, things we don't like. But I think one of the biggest takeaways was this chart shows how people would use it. The primary point of doing this is to access the park. So the whole idea of this project is to connect the South Cornelia neighborhood on the west side of France to all the good stuff on the other side of the street that right now you really can't walk to. And when we polled how they'd use it, they found lots of different ways that they would use it. We did find two people that said they would never use it. So it's not for everybody. Some of the comments I thought were really interesting. The full verbiage is in your packet. But the comments were really forward-thinking, and comments like, expand the Centennial Lakes concept, and make sure to include trees, plants, flowers, and art. Creating an innovative pedestrian crossing would be a true asset to the community. Be sure to build something with artistic design to be iconic and attractive to the users. If you do a tunnel or an underpass, it must be secure, well lit with cameras, etc. Safety and security was an important topic of conversation. One comment that said, without a complete rethinking of all France, we shouldn't do anything. They thought this was a waste of time. So a lot of different opinions. Comments about ADA needs, making sure that we're friendly to seniors and people in wheelchairs. One of the comments that summed it up for me was, he said, just find a way for people to cross France Avenue safely. Just find a way. They had a very long comment. Doesn't matter if it's a bridge, if it's a tunnel, just find a way for me to cross the street safely. So based on what we've gathered so far, we've started to refine and identify the priorities that have been expressed. And separating people from vehicle traffic is of interest to many people. Something that's unique, something that's safe, something that's ADA accessible, and something that's welcoming. So the recommendation, not of a specific project, but just of the general direction, there's a lot of work to do, is to pursue a promenade-style extension going from the existing Edina Promenade westerly through the Macy's Furniture site, crossing France Avenue, and getting to the vacant site across the street, which then gets into the neighborhood. The recommended approach is with an underground underpass. That would require that we have to rebuild a little bit of France Avenue. This rendering just shows it in very basic concept, but we're taking inspiration, frankly, from what's already built. The bridge at York Avenue by the YMCA, the bridges at Park Lawn and 76 on Centennial Lakes, building in that style. Going underground can get expensive, and so the alternate is going over the street. That solution is preferred by the developer of the Macy's site, but it doesn't work out so well on the other side of the street. But that's the backup approach. If we do a bridge, it's recommended to be a signature bridge that really, calls attention and really becomes a notable place. So I mentioned there's lots of next steps. Right now, my request to you is to help set the direction of what kind of project you might actually consider funding. I mean, ultimately, we need to talk to planning commissions and transportation commissions and the county and the general community in much more detail. But when it comes down to it, why we're here today is that this eventually is going to trickle into a TIF request sometime in the next year or two. If that goes forward, I would love to be able to present a proposal to you that you're excited about, that you think actually moves the community in the right direction. So our recommendation is to start designing that promenade style, that landscape path, bike path, pedestrian path, figure out whether we're going to go under the road or over the road, and come back to you probably in a year with a little bit more precision. So this morning I'm seeking your confirmation that you might support, that you do support additional study. I'm not asking your approval of any project, but the developer of the Macy's site is moving forward. Whether we're ready or not, they're moving forward. So I would love to be able to work with him and have some general idea that, if he draws a big concrete paved everything with hurdles that block community access, I want to correct that before he gets too far. So my request this morning is I'm seeking your support for additional study of that recommended design approach, which is the landscape promenade, either going under or over. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Risser.
I've been thinking about this project a lot, and I've been thinking about our process. And in a way, I think one of our callers touched on things that are really bubbling up in my head. And I went back and I looked at the 2007 study for the promenade. This was not a place where it was designated to cross. And in our work session, that was raised to the credit of the people working on this project, the Michaels. But we are at a point where we need to get people safely across this county road. And we're proposing spending a lot of time and effort and money creating a pathway that's not even at an intersection. And that really bothers me because we do need to get people safely across France, and it should be at existing intersections. We should be not, because if we create a different spot that's not an intersection, essentially we're frittering away our opportunity to make an existing intersection safe. And I don't think I can support that. I know I can't support that. The other thing is I look at what's coming down the road and, thinking about, I love the idea that we had a resident call in and talk about prioritizing what we're going to do. And I think, what's bubbling up, what's going to happen? We've got the Hennepin County Library project. You go back, you look at the 2007 study for the promenade. 70th Street is highlighted. That should be our attention. Or it should be, maybe not 70th, but maybe 66th. I don't know. But I think we need to step back, and before we push all of these resources and tee things up, this is just one little step more toward a process, but is this going to be another pathway to nowhere? I don't want, and it really bothers me that we need to step back. We need to think about the infrastructure that we need. We need to think about safety. We need to get very pragmatic about why people walk, so they can get to medical, they can get to dental, they can get to the grocery store, they can get to the new library and the art center. And I don't see, it's all about location, and this location I can't support.
Thank you, Member Risser. Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you. I'm really excited about this project. I love the idea of adding safe crossing either over or under France. I think that this is a great location for it too, and the reason being is the proximity to the promenade, and that this will enable us to actually connect to it. So in my mind, it's not, a connection to nowhere, a bridge to nowhere. It's bridging the promenade to other pedestrian systems that we already have within that area. So to me, that's incredibly important. I definitely hear Commissioner Risser's point on this not being an intersection, and it for me is a priority to improve the safety of our intersections. But I don't think that means that this has to be at an intersection. I think that a project like this, and this was evident in the reports that we got and the previews that we got, a project like this is monumental. It's huge. And there likely isn't going to be opportunities to do it at other locations in other places on France in the near future. And so I think it's really what's the saying, strike while the iron is hot. It's that opportunity where there is construction on both sides. There's going to be activity there. And even if what would happen is what we're seeing now over by Grandview, there's not immediate growth or development on those two sites, there's still the pedestrian areas that we're connecting to. And I think as long as we make that the priority, we prioritize the pedestrian experience, we prioritize safety, and then bring in some of those ideas that were in there of make it beautiful and iconic and a draw. I think that that's going to help ensure that whatever developments do come there are even more successful. So I'm really excited about this, and I do think that this is a good area for it. I will continue to say I want us to think big and do something, again, monumental for this project. But as I understand, what we're doing right now is just authorizing the continued study and not voting on a very specific project. So I will continue to give my feedback on that in those other ceremonies. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have to say I've been thinking about Commissioner Agnew a lot as I've been looking at this project, because when we approved the site plan for 7200 or 7250 France, she said, this plaza isn't a place I would go to. And if we put this passageway in there, very many people will be going to that reserved space and activating it and making it a destination. And the idea of having reserved that space and now making it a desirable place to go, and then the public space that we've put in our agreement with the developer behind those buildings, I'm super excited about activating that and opening it up to the neighborhood and making it a destination. So I very strongly agree with moving forward on this. The other thing is it also takes the spirit of those Southdale guidelines and really makes it walkable dividing these super blocks, inviting people in and connecting it. So it's not currently a crosswalk, but under the Southdale guidelines, our aim is to divide these super blocks and make it walkable. And so I think that's completely in line with our long-term planning for the area. One thing, and this is a small thing, but I'm going to say it every time we talk about this, if we put a tunnel in, I hope it gets tiled. I hope it's a beautiful mosaic. I'm very concerned about graffiti in tunnels, and I am told that tiles are much easier to clean than concrete, and it's a chance for public art and a real sense of placemaking. So you're going to hear public tiles or mosaic tiles from me a lot because I think it'd be beautiful and also really effective for keeping it maintained and safe. So those are my comments.
Thank you. For me, I would say that to Commissioner Risser's concern, it may be theoretically beneficial to put it at put this crossing at an intersection, but regardless of where you put it, people have to move to it. So if you put it at 66th or 70th, 76th, you've got the challenge of private property on all four corners, fully developed. And then if you wanted to move across France Avenue and you were at 76th and you had to go all the way down to 66, people aren't going to do it. This is a midpoint opportunity, and I really stress it as an opportunity, as others have, that if you look at the sketchbook on slides 40 and 41, you get a distinct idea of what this connection east-west could look like, which is akin to what we have in the scrapbook for just a beautiful area of the Centennial Lakes project that goes under some of those same streets. And so you'd have that same sort of effect going east to west. So I think that if this is one of those situations for me where if you build it right, they will come. And you've actually hit a midpoint where it's easier for people to come from both directions, as opposed to going way down the street to one spot, either north or south. And so I think this is a great compromise and a great opportunity, as others have pointed out, because we got these two properties led by your thinking that are developing across the street from each other, and we've got some fairly cooperative developers because they think they need TIF, and we can do public improvements with TIF funds, which is our practice. So I too feel like at least three of my colleagues, or two of my colleagues here today, that this is a good thing to keep moving on. And of course, we understand the concern that somebody said this is premature. We're going to be working with the county. I mean, we know it's a county road, and so that just goes part and parcel of building off that good relationship we have with the county to try to get this figured out with them and get people safely across France Avenue. I prefer this method, but we can look at overhead too, and you provided for that in the motion. So that prompt anybody to make any further supplemental comments? Commissioner Risser?
It's just half a block north of the existing trail. And I hear what you all are saying, but I feel like if it could just be, why not enhance what's already there, work with the county and the bike trail people. I also do wonder about Hennepin County. I mean, this will be the second thing with the U.S. Bank project. We now have a pullover in the middle of a block, and the original project that came before, the very, very original U.S. Bank, would have taken it along 70th, so you wouldn't have had that access along France. And I just feel like we really need to think a little bit about how we are breaking up our roads, and we do have that Greater Southdale Area Design Guideline, but we need to think about safe pathways and all that. It'll be interesting to see. We did get this $200,000 grant from the federal government to come up with a plan for safe streets and roads for all. I do think there's an equity issue here too. We talk about placemaking. This would be a wonderful place where I would want to go and I would want to hang out. We do have people who need to have infrastructure, not just and it's important to go and to hang out and do all that, but it's also important to provide safe infrastructure so people can walk places. So I think we do have a different kind of view on it. I think we need to think about how we're prioritizing, and I think getting people to places, what are our top projects, and go back and think about that. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Manager Newendorf, then I'll make a comment too.
Sure, I'll just, a very brief response. So just be aware that the image that we're showing is not the project. So that green space, the alignment might shift to the southern part of it, might shift to the north, might shift in the middle. It's just, we needed to just start drawing something. But the focus will be on the 2 properties that are currently in play. We know that the Lund's grocery store is not going to get torn down and rebuilt, and we know that the Pinstripes building is not going to get torn down and rebuilt. So we'll continue to have dialogue with the 2 properties that are in play, but that path could migrate anywhere on those properties. So we'll definitely keep our eyes open there.
The other thing I think Commissioner Risser raised is an opportunity for us here, and that is if we keep moving on this right now, on this intended course, and we get to some rough preliminary design, we've got 2 years left on that IIJA bill at the federal level. And remember, Commissioner Risser's raised some interesting issues that we've discussed before about what this crossing offers in terms of grant funding opportunities. And then the state is also offering matching funds for these grant applications that are going into the federal government. So I think the sooner we move, the better, and get to the point where we can submit something to the federal government that touches on all these important issues like equity, safety, mobility on a non-motorized basis. I think we'd have a good chance of getting some of that federal money, but we need to move. And this is a chance to move. So, is there a motion to authorize staff to study the feasibility of using HRA funding resources to design and construct a pedestrian crossing that spans above and below France Avenue to extend the promenade trail system to commercial properties at 7235, 7200, and 7250 France Avenue?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Agnew moves, Commissioner Jackson seconds the motion as stated. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated, adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Carried. The motion's approved. Thank you. Okay, now do you want to give us a quick update on one other matter, 5146 Eden Avenue?
Yep, so this is under the Executive Director's update, but I just wanted to brief you and be on record. So we've been working for a long time on the HRA's property at 5146 Eden Avenue. My news this morning is bad. I try to bring hopeful news, but today is just not what we were expecting. With the financial markets where they are and the prices of real estate where they are, our residential partner, United Properties, has terminated their contract on that site. We got the official termination about a week ago, and so I just wanted to make you all aware of that. It's deeply disappointing for everyone involved. This is not the outcome we were aiming for or working toward, but in the months ahead, I will return to you with some new ideas. And we will have more dialogue. We hope the site isn't vacant for too much longer, but we will continue that dialogue. But it will probably not be with United Properties.
Yeah. Well, it continues to be a very good site, a preferred site, and we'll figure out a good use for the property. All right. Thanks for that update. Anything further from an executive director standpoint?
No, there isn't. Thank you.
Okay. Anything further from commissioners in terms of comments? Otherwise, we could adjourn and then reconvene as a city council for the work that we need to do in canvassing the results of the November 7, 2023 election. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting of the HRA this 16th day of November 2023?
So moved.
A second.
Commissioner Jackson moves, Commissioner Agnew seconds the adjournment of the HRA meeting this 16th day of November 2023 at 8:56 a.m. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned.